Hey everybody, this is Ruby as always, and welcome back to the RedM script development series. So first of all, I apologize for the major delay in videos. I was having a lot of issues with RedM working on my PC. I thought it was an issue with my graphics card, and it just ended up being with the files I had on my PC. So after reinstalling the game and reinstalling RedM, finally got it to work, and then honestly, it wasn't just that. This year's probably kind of been tough on a lot of people, including myself. So anyways, I had some ideas for the kind of like script that we could develop is kind of like a delivery system where you'll be able to get a wagon and you'll have to go to some certain spots throughout the map and make some deliveries. So I picked some spots already in Valentine that we can kind of, use so we can just kind of hit the ground running. And already kind of done some legwork in some of the public code that's available for RedM and in the decompiled scripts that people have already found. There's a lot of stuff that's still kind of buggy and still kind of wonky, but I mean, this is very early alpha for RedM, so it's kind of to be expected. So I thought I would approach this video a little bit differently than all the other ones. Instead of typing everything out constantly, I figure it might be more concise to just show the code and explain it instead of trying to type it all out at the same time. It's also less frustrating, I think, instead of like possibly making mistakes or having to type everything out while explaining it and I end up just blabbering. So anyways, what I want to do is start out here in the utility file. So in here, it's got quite a few little kind of helpers that just like display text and make blips for us, stuff like that. So we'll go over the subtitle things when we get to the text part of this. But the first thing here are the world markers. So what I'm doing is I have a list here of all the vectors in the world where we want to generate little markers. And then for all of them here in the tick event, which I'm getting called via the decorator for tick, and which you do have to have the kind of base script parent set up, is down here for each of those world markers we have set up, I'm calling the draw marker native here. There is, I believe, an API function for this, but it doesn't quite work, or it's not there. I don't remember. A lot of these, if I'm using a native, the API function isn't there or it doesn't work, basically. Or I just couldn't get it to work possibly. So in here, this is the native hash for the draw marker. This first one you're seeing here is the blip type, and this just generates a regular old blip, or not blip, marker type, I'm sorry. And then the position, and then some of these are like rotation, I believe, and a lot of these have to do with if you're drawing a sprite within the marker, but we're not, we're just using a regular one. And some of these are color and alpha, for example, and yeah, a lot of these are to do with the sprite, which we're not really using here. The next function you see here is for enabling blip GPS, and this basically calls, I believe it's like set blip modifier or something like that, and you pass in the blip ID and then the modifier, and this specific modifier here is for forcing the GPS on for that blip. There's also a different one for if you only wanted to force it on if they're on a horse, but in this case we're always going to be on foot, so we can't really use that one. This next function here is for adding a blip for coordinates, and it's going to intake a sprite ID. So this will be like what we want it to appear on the map with, and the position in the world where we want it to be, and then if we want to enable GPS by default. So in here it's just calling the like create blip for coordinates native, and then we're passing in the sprite ID and the position, and then we're just calling our GPS helper. And it's essentially the same exact thing for entity, except we're just taking in an entity ID and passing it to the native there, and it is a different native. Then this next helper is getting back to that text stuff we were talking about, and basically display text is going to be our helper, like we've used in some of our other projects before, where we just want to display some text at the bottom of the screen to the player. So this is going to intake text and a duration, and that's like how long in ticks we want to display it. So what we're doing here is we're just setting up the time end by calculating what the current time is right now and then plus the duration. So that way we don't have to track like a time start and a duration, we just track the end, and it's just one variable. And then we're setting the text here. Because we have to display this in the tick event, we can't display this like once, for example. So the next thing here is to display help text. So this is kind of a different text from above. Is in here you can see I'm rendering it kind of like a teal color. and then I'm also displaying it lower in the screen. So we'll go over that here in a second, but basically we have this draw text helper here, and this is what's handling drawing all of the text on the screen that we'll be displaying. And basically it takes in the text that you want to display, of course, then a font ID, and then the X and the Y. And the X and the Y is a float from 0.0 to 1, and of course X is from left to right, Y is from top to bottom. If it was 0, 0, it'd be in the top corner. If it was 1, 1, it'd be in the bottom right corner. And then you're going to take in the scale of the text, so that's just how large it is, and then of course the color values in alpha. So in here we're just displaying slightly cyan color, and then up here in the tick event, if we have a valid text value, here we're checking if it's null, then we're just going to draw that text, and in here you see we're drawing it completely white, and then we're displaying it on 85% of the screen, while the help text we're displaying at 90% of the screen. So you'll be able to kind of see the difference once we get into game. So down here below, inside the draw text function, we have all of the different actual functions we have to call to draw the text. So the first one we'll do is we'll set the text scale. We're going to set the text color, and then we're going to set it to be centered, or else you would have it justified off to the left depending on whatever percentage you put in. This next hash here just loads the font. If you don't do this native, it will just display a very default, like almost like Arial font looking typeface. And then the next thing we're calling is the display text function, and then we're calling this native here, which generates the string for it to display, and it returns a long. And then we're just passing in the X and the Y. And then the important thing here is that you could render a shadow for this text to make it more visible, like for example if it was a bright background. But one thing I noticed that the game does a lot is just draw a backdrop for it. So here we're calculating line length, and we do that by taking the length of the text, making it into a percentage by dividing by 100, and then I'm just timesing it by 66%, and I find that that gives me enough padding on the ends and it looks nice. And the important thing is that you make this a float, or else it will be an integer, and it will just be 0. So then we're calling draw texture. This is a little helper function here, and the important thing to note is this is very similar to like sounds and stuff like that. Is the way Rockstar makes everything load is everything's almost kind of like a folder and file format. So imagine boot flow being the folder and then the box being the file. So in here we can see we're taking the texture dictionary, then the texture name, then we're going to pass in the X and the Y coordinate of where the text is being displayed, because we want to display this backdrop behind it. Then we're going to pass in our line length, so that is how long the texture needs to be. And then of course we have our height, and then rotation, which we don't really need, and then all of our different color values, and we want this to display in black, so it gives us some nice contrast, and then 200 alpha will give us kind of a slightly transparent background. So then we get to the actual draw texture function. So the first part of this function is very similar to like our load model stuff, so we're just going to check and make sure that if we don't have it loaded, we're going to go ahead and request that we load that texture dictionary, and then while it's loading we're just going to wait and display a helper message, and then at the end, once it's loaded, or if it was already loaded, then we're going to call the draw sprite function. We're going to pass in our texture dictionary, our texture name, our X, and then what's important here is that we're passing in our Y with a slight offset, is that the sprite will be offset from the text. So you have to add a little bit of a buffer here so that it displays correctly. Then we're just passing in our width, our height, rotation, color values, and then true for this last Boolean value it requires. And then the last function here that's kind of pertinent to the code is the load model. Very similar to all our other ones. I'm just taking in a string model mainly so that I can just kind of display the actual model name here in the helper message instead of like an int or a uint value. So here I'm just converting it. I'm getting the hash key for the model, checking, making sure it's valid. If it's not, we're going to exit out of the function, and then if we haven't loaded it, I'm going to go ahead and request that we load it. And then while it's loading, we're just going to wait and display a little helper message. And then at the end, once it's loaded, we'll return true. This last thing right here is not very important for the kind of functionality of the deliveries, but this is more for just kind of helping find your location and heading in the game. You could also just kind of write a function that'll always display this kind of like at the bottom of your screen if you wanted for when you're in development. But here we're just getting the player's coordinates, getting its heading, and then I'm just writing it out here. And that was useful for when I was finding like the cart spawn location and stuff like that. So that is all of the utility functions. It's quite a mouthful, quite a bit. And then some of them, we can't even really explain just because there's so many variables to it. So if we come back to the main function here, we have all of our different variables we have set up. So to go over these real quick, they're very self-explanatory. So our start blip ID, this is going to be where we want to start the mission at. Our destination blip ID is going to be where we want to deliver to. So that's going to be like our different locations throughout Valentine. Then our third one is going to be our vehicle ID, and then our vehicle blip ID. Our last one are going to be our job destinations, and this is going to be a ever-changing list of vectors throughout the world of as you make progress. We're going to slowly remove those. Then we have all of our different Boolean flags, making sure we can start the mission, checking if we're waiting to start, if we're in progress, if the mission is ending, and then if we're waiting to clean the car up. The next part is we're setting up our cart models. So you could always just roll with one cart model and just load that. But here I'm just using these two carts. I found they work quite well. They're not too big. And then the next thing we're setting up here is the start location. So this is actually in front of the bar in the saloon. And then our vehicle start location, which is behind the saloon. And then we have our destinations for the jobs. So here I have this set up like this so we can just copy into this job destinations list, and we can add and remove from this as we please, and we don't have to worry about like copying it again if we wanted to say run this job again afterwards. And ideally we separate this out into a JSON configuration, which we can very much get to in this series. And then of course we have our random operator here for working with picking a random cart. And then so inside our main function, we're just doing some basic setup when it first initializes. So we're going to go ahead and add our start location. Then we're going to add our blip. And the blip that it's going to make for this is a little yellow dot. Then we want to set the blip name, or else it'll just say like blip underscore name. So we're going to do set blip from text file. And then I looked through some of the decompiled scripts and found blip saloon. And that'll set the name to just saloon. And then we want to set can start mission to true. And that'll allow us to kind of see the marker and kind of walk into it and interact with it. The next thing we have here is the tick handler. We'll come back to that here in a second. So down here we have all of our different like kind of helpers that we're using in there. We have some cleanup, and we have our start delivery. So this will be kind of the next thing we go over is we have our, we'll go ahead and we'll set that we can't start a mission, and that'll just get rid of the marker, get rid of the like the way that you can start everything. And then we'll set waiting to start to true, and this will basically be the marker that designates the time from when they start the mission and they haven't actually started driving yet. So we want to give them like a little blip that tells them where the vehicle is. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to remove the marker. Then what we're going to do next is have the job destinations, and if you set it up like this, it'll just copy the destinations over. If you don't do that, it will just make a reference, and it's not going to be quite what you want. The next thing we'll do is we'll remove the blip for the start location so that it's not always there. And then I always like to play sounds. I like sounds, so we'll use the play sound front end function. And then much like the textures, we're going to load the reward new gun dictionary, and then we're going to call the HUD reward sound set. It's kind of like a little cha-ching sound. It works for it. And next we're going to go ahead and decide what our cart model is. So we're just going to call our cart models, and then we're just going to pick a random index that's within the length that you have, so you can add and remove as you please. We're going to go ahead and load the cart model, and then we're going to create it and assign that to vehicle ID. And here we're just getting the hash key Then we're passing in our vehicle start location, and then here's our heading for 90. And then the important thing here is it takes 4 booleans at the end. The important thing is that you set the third one to false. If you set this to true, your horses for your wagon won't spawn with it. It'll just be there by itself, and you won't get very far. The next thing we'll do is we'll set the vehicle as a mission entity, and this just makes sure it doesn't go away for any reason. The next thing we'll do is we'll make a blip for the vehicle, and this is just so that we can kind of show the player where their next destination is. And this blip that we're setting up here is like a little yellow dot with an X in it. And then we'll use our display text helper to tell them, hey, thanks, the wagon's out back. And since this automatically has enabled GPS to true by default, we don't have to worry about setting GPS on. It'll automatically kind of route them to it. So we'll come up here and we'll start going over some of our tick events. So the first thing that we have to do is kind of handle walking into the marker and stuff like that. So the first thing we want to do is get the player pet ID, and then we want to get the player position because we'll be referencing it quite a bit throughout. The next thing we'll want to do is go ahead and check if they can start the mission. If they can, then we want to check whatever the distance is from the player to the start location. And then if they are within 2 meters, we want to display some help text, just telling them, press T to start a delivery mission. And then within the same function, we want to check if they actually pressed that button. And much like the last videos, we'll just use the T button here, and you'll be able to find all this information down in the description. And then we want to call our start delivery function that we just went over. So after that's done, this will basically set it up. It'll go ahead and start the delivery. And then the next thing we need to work on is the logic for waiting to start. So this is the time from when they start the mission to when they're getting in the vehicle. So what we want to do is check for when they get into the vehicle we created. So we'll check if they're waiting to start. Then we'll make sure that they have a valid last vehicle. And then we'll make sure that the vehicle that they're in, if they are in one, is equal to the vehicle ID. If it is, then we know they just got in the vehicle. And we'll go ahead and set waiting to start to false. Then we'll set our next flag for in progress to true. And then this way we kind of know, okay, now they've started the job. Now they need to start delivering. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll remove the vehicle blip ID, because if you remember, we set that to like a little yellow X icon, and I'd rather make it something different. So we'll go ahead and we'll remove the blip and we'll make a new blip ID. And this one I'm going to set to a little gray circle. It's like one of the companion icons, I believe. And it displays nice on the map, and it hides under your player's character on the mini map. So it doesn't take up like a bunch of room. The next thing we want to do is create a blip for the destination. So this will be another little like yellow X icon. And then we want to just tell it to make a blip for whatever the first index in the job destinations is. So that'll be our first location that we're going to. And then we want it to enable GPS for it, so we'll pass true. And then we'll go ahead and give them some nice text and tell them, hey, go ahead and proceed to the first destination. So now that they actually are in the vehicle and they should be driving to the location, we want to check a couple things while they're in progress, like while they're in the progress of the job. So you can see here we're calling vehicle checks, and basically what vehicle checks is going to do is check a couple different variables and cases and make sure that nothing else like funny is going on. So the first thing it'll do is it'll see if the pet is in any vehicle. If it's not, it'll tell them to get back into the wagon. And then honestly, this could even be improved, and you could say, and you could check and make sure that the player is in the vehicle that you created. So that way they don't get into like another vehicle, then this would go away, for example. So the next thing we'll do is call this health check function, and this is going to basically return if the vehicle is drivable or if the player is not dead. So as long as those two cases, is that the vehicle is drivable and the player is not dead, which is important here, then it's all good. If one of those are false, then we're going to do some basic cleanup. We're going to set these variables to false to kind of reset everything. Then we're going to do some cleanup. And in the cleanup, we're just kind of redoing a lot of the initialization. So we're going back, we're setting can start mission to true, we're adding some blips, we're setting the name, and then we're going to remove any information about the vehicle. We're going to say it's no longer needed, and then we're going to set this waiting for car cleanup to be true. And basically all that's doing is just checking if the entity is on screen or if it's occluded, and it deletes it. However, this doesn't really seem to work 100%. However, if you set the vehicle as no longer needed, if you were to start another job, whenever it goes to spawn that second wagon, it'll just delete your old one, and it won't like interact or interfere, with it at all. Alright, so back to in progress. So if vehicle checks is all good, then it'll continue on, and we want to get the vehicle position that we created. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the distance between the vehicle position and whatever our first destination's position is. And as long as we are within 5 meters, then we want to check what their velocity is. So they're not just doing a drive-by and just flying by. So if the velocity is not equal to 0, we want to just display some help text to them and just tell them, hey, come to a complete stop to complete this delivery. So if it is equal to 0, that means they're at a dead stop, and we want to go ahead and give them some help text to deliver, and then we want to detect if they pressed the T button. So if they did, then we want to go ahead and remove whatever our current blip destination blip ID is. Then we will remove whatever our first index is on job destinations. Then if the count is not equal to 0, so that means you have more destinations to go to, we'll go ahead and we'll set up a new destination blip and get that all going and tell them to proceed. However, if it is 0, then we know that was their last destination and they need to head back. So we'll go ahead and we'll set in progress to false and is ending to true, and then we'll give them a blip for back to the saloon, back to our start location where you originally picked up the wagon. And we'll give them some help text to just tell them to drop it back off. Alright, so now if it is ending, it's basically the same thing that we just did. Again, we're going to check and make sure the vehicle's good, the player's good. We're getting the vehicle position, and then the only difference is we're getting the distance from the start location. And then at the end, if the player is in a vehicle, we tell them we're going to check the velocity and see if it's 0. If it's not 0, we're going to tell them to come to a complete stop. And then if it is 0 and they are in a vehicle, we'll tell them to get out. Then once they aren't in the vehicle, it's a little complicated, but it's a kind of a good logic loop to prevent like any weirdness from happening. But we'll basically check if the pet is in any vehicle, being ourselves. Then we'll set is ending to false, and then we'll call our cleanup function. We'll give them some help text, and we'll play another little kind of cha-ching sound. And then ideally, we would increment their money, but I couldn't find a way to get that to work. Even using the natives and looking through the decompiled scripts, couldn't quite figure that out, but we should have it here pretty soon. So let's go ahead and check it out in game. Everybody's awkwardly staring. Alright, so we go ahead and we'll press T, start our delivery mission. Thanks for taking the job. The wagon's out back. Make our exit. So as you can see on the map, we have our GPS and all that. That's nice. So here's our ride, per se. So there we go. We'll go ahead and we'll proceed to our first delivery destination. And one thing I hope that gets fixed soon is like some of like the different kind of like visual glitching. But I have a feeling this game has like so many different like loading IPCs, kind of like GTA 5 has. So I imagine it's a mess. So we'll come to a complete stop. We'll press T and go ahead and deliver. One thing that I'd like to do, like on this whole upgrade eventually, is have a more advanced delivery system where you actually have to get off, you have to go to the back, and then we can do some of the like different box animations, because I know there's quite a bit of like different animations they have loaded for the camps and stuff. So like it's possible we could use one of those or something for the delivery, which I think would be cool, but I have to figure all that stuff out. But I figure this is a nice middle ground, and you know, it works for now. So let's head on to our last destination. I don't know why these people are getting it when everybody else is like saloons and stuff, but you know. Let's hurry up and get in front of this guy. Cut him off. I'm a bad driver. Alright, and let's go ahead and park up. Oh, we're almost there. There we go. And exit the vehicle. We'll go ahead and get off. We need to change that from vehicle. And then thank you for the quick work. Come by anytime for another job. So there we go. You can see we don't have any blips on our map anymore because we're removing all of them. So if we come back in here, we can even get another job if we wanted to. And say press T. And we can go out back. And it'll load up those job destinations again and give us a new horse and wagon. And we even got a different one. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I thought it was a pretty cool little plugin. It's quite basic right now, but like I said, I think it would be cool to do more research and kind of figure out all of the different kind of actions. Like for example, whenever you're like right here and you get the different call outs in the bottom corner of your screen, like where's one at? I figured we'd get, yeah, like rest, for example. Like does he even rest? Oh, he rests. Okay. And I think it would be cool to have a call out like that. So I don't know, I kind of need to look through the decompiled scripts or see if there's anything like publicly available that would kind of already do that. But anyways, I'll go ahead and end it off there. I'm sure this video is already long enough and you guys have waited long enough. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Please leave your suggestions down below or any questions or anything like that, and I'll see you guys on the next one.